Yes.
So
Go.
I can speak.
Yes,
Okay,
please.
thank you very much for your presentation. It is a very good one. But I'd like to ask, you see that 4-part categorization, I do not remember whether you looked at the very first part, which was the expert prescriber rule. Catholic Pictal, they have 4 rules. And the first one was the expert prescriber, where the person will diagnose PR problems and also proffer solutions. But I only heard the communication and then manager and then the communication technician. So where would the expert prescriber be in this role? I'm asking 2 questions. Where would be the role of the expert prescriber in this situation? And lastly, you know that those roles that you have were categorized, indeed, sometimes you can have a PR practitioner or a PR person or manager practicing everything. You have somebody who is an expert prescriber, depending on the context, or maybe a PR department. You find him performing all the roles. He may be a PR person, but he's also like the technician. So how would you place these 2 scenarios? And where would you place the expert prescriber in this particular discussion? Thank you.
Right. Thank you for the question. So generally, public relations rules are 2. What you call communication manager's role and the communication technician role. But within the communication manager's role, we have those 3 other functions: expert prescriber, problem-solving facilitator, and communication facilitator. So they are within the manager's role, right? So what I found in this study is that accounts probably, unless I do more study into the general account culture, that of expert prescriber role wasn't found, and the other one, problem solving. But the communication facilitator role, which is performed by the chairman, was actually found, because he will facilitate communication, remove barriers in communication, because when transcending, if I'm to speak to the chief and I'm speaking directly through the chairman, if I say something which is maybe a foul language, it is the chairman who would correct that using proverbs and paraphrase to make the speech very nice or appealing to the chief. And actually, the Maria of the chairman said to me that it is not what I say that the chief will hear, it is what is transcended to him by the chairman, right? So sometimes maybe if you don't know and you say something which is bad, the chairman can say, "Nana, we didn't want, Nana, you didn't hear this." Then in transmitting, you will make it more appealing to the ears of the chief. In the same way that if the chief don't say something which is not befitting of his status, the chairman translating that will also use proverbs and a very nice. So these are ways the person is facilitating communication, right? Then your second question that has to do with, if you can come back again.
The measure of the rules, where.
Yeah. So if that is not an excellent concept. Excellent doesn't preach that you should have one man performing all roles. So that is the evidence that I can't even practice this 800 years before excellent study was just conducted in 84. They knew that there should be division. There should be people who beat the drum before the chief speak. There should be people who would dance to communicate a certain message to the people. There should be people who will herald the chief with poetry. And there should be people who kind of give praises to the purposes of the chief's speech. So they knew that this communication role shouldn't be performed by one person. So that's an excellent concept in our own traditional concept. Yeah.
Yeah, Charlie, Mr. Iddrisu, this is solid. And I love the fact that the study led to some post-study models, which may become very important for our teaching and learning of public relations. Now, my worry is that we are trying to talk about public relations from the perspective of our history, but the entire study is situated within westernized theoretical paradigms, like the excellence theory. So how are we championing our own historiography through these westernized paradigms? That's my first question. My second question is, we all understand, and of course, the studies you refer to, John, who was Professor Amakwini's work, and Ansa, those works are very, very visible in telling the story, they talk about public relations in Ghana starting from the arrival of the expatriates, But I think that they were talking about the structured form of PR as we have it today, serving the needs of top blue chip companies and so on. So I'm wondering if we are studying this, or I'm wondering what would be the importance of this particular discussion within the Akan culture, teasing out the public relations. What would be its importance on the practice of PR today? For example, if I want to be the corporate communication manager for Shell or Vivo Energy, how would all of these be important to me in my delivery?
Right. So I'll start from your second question. It is important because it gives you the perspective that the jurisdiction or the context you work, they already knew public relations, except that they didn't call it. So you couldn't or you can't take them for granted when it comes to applying public relation concept. So for instance, if you work for Vivo, and Vivo is located in a community, you are going to meet a chief. There are certain formal protocols that you need to follow. And the chiefs are well aware about some of these basic communication principles, except that they are not formalized in our formal books or in our Western books, but they know it from their indigenous concepts and practices. So I think it's very relevant in our public relations practice, especially within communities and where what I call high cultural context communities in Ghana, where culture is the order of the day in everyday life of the people. Now your second question that has to do with
the Eurocentric theoretical paradigm.
Yeah, so this study is actually seated in qualitative study. And we know the ontological basis of qualitative study is that knowledge is perspective. And knowledge is there, we just come to discover it, right? So excellence practices in Akan existed, except that they discovered it, they formalized it. But we knew it, right? So I don't think there should be any kind of theory like this is the way Akan should practice their public relations, or this is our theory. The excellence theory, we practice it, but except that they conducted studies later on to come and formalize it. And from these explanations I have demonstrated, or from these presentations that we all have seen, I don't remember any of the Western cultures have this. The best you can find in any, probably proud to modern day public relations, we know the day of the public be damned, the public be full. None of the Western cultures had something similar like this, where we have two middle roles, we have somebody playing the communication manager's role, technician role, we have communication tasks being divided among communication technicians so that they are performed effectively. I don't think we have that in the books. You are well grounded in public relations lecture. I don't know whether you have that. We don't. What we have is publicity. To even start with, the public be fooled, then public be damned. Then probably now we have two-way, even asymmetric, right? Then of course now we are talking about two-way symmetric. So we don't have that. The closest you can come is ancient Egyptian culture. That mostly you find some of the studies, like Nati, for instance, in 1988, page 25. It makes reference to Ochame. I've talked about that. Rosenberg, one South African scholar, also talks about ancient Egyptian culture. But you wouldn't find any kind of deep analysis into a certain tradition culture to review some of these excellence concepts. I haven't come across. We have our senior men here, if they have that.
Okay, so maybe we should be moving towards calling them, our own way, perhaps some grounded theory of could be an interesting.
Thank you. My comment or question relates to the theory and models. And I think you try to coin something here, and that's the Akan public relation model. So I think, I'm sure you are getting somewhere in terms of formulating a theory or a model that reflects the Akan system of PR practice. But I have a problem usually with the rise of the global south in terms of academia. And I notice that sometimes when they coin theories and models, it just overlaps and repeats what already exists. For instance, your Akan PR model. When you explain, I was wondering what really is the difference between what you are proposing and then the two-way symmetry, because it's basically the same. So I just want to know the difference between what you propose as the Akan PR model and then the two-way symmetry model of public relation practice.
Well, sometimes why you need to use their model, one scholar said that there is nothing appealing like using your opponent's own evidence to beat the person, right? So we call it public relations because there are ways that we are supposed to see it being practiced, right? And my argument in this study is that what you call public relations, we knew it and we practice it. There is nothing new you want to tell us. So if maybe you want to come up with a different theory, then we can't call that public relations. We may call that a different thing. Now, what differentiates advertising from public relations are the theories and the principles in practice, right? So if today we should develop something that is different from public relations theories and public concept, then we can't call that PR. We have to give it a different name. So maybe if we are asking for a new theory that will conceptualize Akan communication knowledge, then we have to call it something else but not PR. But if we are terming it PR, then the best theory is to use PR's own normative theory, which is the excellence theory, to do the analysis. And when we do the analysis and it fits, then that is the case we bring the evidence that, except that we didn't call it PR, we knew this. There is nothing new you have to offer. That's the basis. Right.
But can the excellence theory, like from what you just said, can we then expand the excellence theory with some other variables or new variables that may come in because of what you have found?
Yes, there is actually a study, and that is even the second level of the theory of generic principle and specific application by Fuseini Iddrisu, 1996. So it is called the Slovenian study. After the excellence study, they realized that it doesn't fit in every context, right? Because within context, we have certain elements that will make PR practice different. So another study was conducted in Slovenia, which I also have a problem, because the first study, the samples were picked from US, UK, and Canada. That is Western culture. Then you want to do a meta-research or meta-study, you pick the study sample or you conduct that study in Slovenia, which still reflects the Western paradigms or Western knowledge, right? But however, they were able to come up with 5 environmental principles that would differentiate public relation practice across country. And these principles are culture, level of infrastructure, development, media system, and activism. So these 5 elements are elements that will make public relations different from different parts of the world. So if you come to our Ghanaian culture, our Ghanaian setting, our culture will make public relation practice different from the way America will practice this. And actually that system recognizes that, because you don't expect to practice PR in America the same way you practice it in North Korea, because the political ideologies in these countries are different. So there's actually a second level theory that add up to the excellence theory to recognize differences in practice in various countries. Yeah.
Yes. This one is mine. All right, thank you. Very good presentation. You mentioned that the linguist is part of the dominant coalition.
Yes.
So if you look at the traditional setup, who are the other people who make up the dominant coalition beyond the linguist? And then I also want to know, looking at the excellence theory and all the principles that we have discussed, don't you think we can also look at our context and see what can work for us in Ghana or in Africa for that matter?
Right, so I think I'll start from the second question, and I think it's what I touched on from where Reverend Jawu spoke, that aside the excellence study, there has been another study that recognized that we have different way countries will want to see their PR being practiced. So that second level theory, which is known as the theory of generic principle and specific application theory by Jan Vesage, Grunick, and Grunick, actually recognize that differences in environment, right, and says that a country's political ideology can make its public relation practice a bit different from what we expect to see in excellence practices, or a country's culture may not allow it to practice the way we want to see it practice excellent. So there is actually a theory for that, right? So probably creating a theory within the Ghanaian setting will be a duplication, right? Then your first question that has to do with people who add up to the chief to form the council, that will strictly, that would depend on the structure of that particular palace. So if you go to the Ashanti Palace, they have their own structure. I studied this in Pichman, and I know what happened. They have what you call two-tier chief. So the first sub-divisional chief and the second sub-divisional chief. So the first sub-divisional chief, they are 11, together with the linguist and the chief, right? They form the, what do you call it, dominant coalition, because they take the most critical decision for the traditional area. And the most important thing is that...
Just to clarify, when you say chief, that's the Omahene, right?
The Omahene, right, the Omahene. And the other sub-chief. So normally you find that we have other traditional areas. So for instance, maybe 2-4, we have the Bantamahene, who is also the Chidomhene of Otumfo. So that's how Akans fashion their structure, right? So Bantama is a suburb of Kumasi. So the chief there has a role he plays for Otumfo. Even though when he comes to his own chiefdom, he's accorded that boss or the Ogade. But when he goes to Otumfo's palace, he serves there. He's a person providing services to Otumfo. Mampoahene, the same thing. So those group of people will form the dominant coalition because Otumfo thinks with them and they take the most important decision. And the linguist is always part of them. What we normally call the chief linguist, the Achamehene.
Me, I'm just concerned. I was looking at this diagram, and I don't know whether when you say people, you mean local residents or who specifically are the local, the people. And apart from that, I'm talking about the local community members, citizens. I don't know, but I think that in all your presentations, try and own what you draw or develop. This one, for instance, you could underneath the source and the researchers construct. So own what you draw. For your own purposes.
All right. Thank you very much. I appreciate that concern. In fact, you see, it's because of the way our contemporary governance system is structured. That's why we don't really see the relevance of these chieftaincy institutions. But some years past, or some years maybe ago, you find that the people in Kumasi would have owed that allegiance to Otumfo, right? So it's the entire people who are considered as the publics, who will normally take communication from the palace and direction from the palace.
Honestly, when I was looking at it.
No, it is the people the chief leads.
Leads, something like
Why
that.
wouldn't it just be community members or
I think
So community is so limited.
Yeah, the people means that the people who are under the chief, who are because the chief is not a leader on his own.
Yeah. And in fact, the world is aware that I'm conceptualizing something called the cultural publics. Yes, in another study that I'm looking at. So the cultural publics will be the people that the chief has authority over within his jurisdiction as a chief. So in that setting, we treat those people as cultural publics because they have that cultural bond to the chief.
Right. And it doesn't even only limit it to those who are subjects of the chief, because you see, you have beautifully indicated the publics, because all stakeholders.
Exactly.
So maybe the person may not be a subject of the stool, but the person may one way or the other be a stakeholder.
Yeah.
So they are all involved, or they are all included in the people or the public.
Okay. My issue is on the last point, which is diversity in the public relations department. Now, if you look at that particular principle in the excellence theory, it talks about diversity in terms of gender, in terms of race, in terms of religion, and a lot of other demographics come into play. So when you said you saw evidences of that diversity in this structure, I was a bit curious, because obviously these are people who belong to the PR department. They will be people who belong to the same ethnic group. They are predominantly men. You don't find any woman blowing the horn, in the cultural setting. They are predominantly men. And you talk about diversity in terms of race. Obviously, they belong to the same ethnic group. You could have belonged to the communication. So I don't think there are variations. or you could find variations?
There are.
If you have, please let us know.
There are. Because the dancers are also providing a communication role. Because Akan's dance communicates. They don't just dance anyhow. And the communication dance performances are performed by women. Right? And normally you find that they have a term called Nkwa. They are normally those they pick as messengers. Nkwa are not people from the royal setting or from the people within that setting. They are normally war, what do you call it? Should I say booties or people they get them from battles. If they are defeated, they pick those people and they provide that services. So that's different race or different tradition. So that diversity exists within there.
And to add to that, you see, when the excellence theory is talking about that, it is looking at it from a certain context where it is easy to find different, for instance, races. But if we are looking at it from a community where people are they are identical. I think is the word homogeneous.
Yeah.
It will be difficult to look at it from that angle. So maybe what we can do is in Akan itself, there are different, for instance, the tribes. There are people who have different Ntong and Ntro. So this one is from this particular tribe or clan. And all of these different clans, the people on those clans can be found within the structure of the public house. Okay.
Yeah, that's a very good presentation. I just want to find out what is the motivation in settling on the Akan tradition rather than the other ethnic group. Is it the case that exactly? Yeah, is it the case that some of the practices that we find here cannot be found in the other cultures, like that?
Well, so yeah, I think I'll have to agree with you. My motivation for this study, actually that was my thesis that I did for my postgraduate studies at Winneba. So I mined it for the paper, right? So my observation has to do with intense reading about public relation history and the lab I developed for that. I was reading a book chapter by Professor Tom Watson, a public relations historian and professor emeritus, in Tench and Yeoman's Exploring Public Relations, page 4. And this man was giving histories about PR in various traditions. And he dedicated about 90 lines describing public relations history in Asia, about a page for US and about a page for Europe. But when it came to public relations history in Africa, it was written in 9 lines and boxed together with the Middle East narrative, right? So I find that as a condescending position and a kind of an insult to the African culture. So that actually struck me that I need to do something and to search for public relations evidences in our own tradition. And the reason why probably I didn't go into my own tradition, I'm a Gunja boy from Bole in the northern region, is because I've lived all my life with Akans. I was born in Sudan, that's why I grew up SS, I attended SHS there and all that. So I'm quite familiar with Akan culture. And like study principle will argue that normally go to places that you are a bit familiar with the cultural terrain in order to be able to explore. So that's actually my motivation. Maybe moving forward, there are gaps that we can look at in other various traditions that it's possible maybe no one can look at the Ewe tradition and we can find.
So did you use ethnography?
Ethnography.
You said you used
No,
case
that was
study.
case study.
Okay.
I used case study. Yeah. You know, ethnography, you wouldn't be allowed to stay in the palace. That would be a problem.
So observation becomes an issue.
And then the focus group discussion, how would you conduct it?
So the focus group discussion, the caveat I use is that these are people who should have knowledge about public and palace communication activities and may have communicated to the palace one way or the other. And in fact, the study also goes through, there are lots that it talks about, but you know, in presentation you can't bring everything here, so you have to bring the most vital part. So people who have experienced communication in terms of arbitration processes and all that. So those that I sampled, and I make sure that we have that gender diversity men and women together to engage them in their focus group activity. Yeah, Doug.
Okay, somebody may have asked, I keep going back and forth, but I see that you applying the extant models to Akan practice. So to see evidence of these things in practice here. But is there a possibility that there are things that are being done that are not captured in these models? So you could extend the models and provide revisions to them as to, okay, this is what has been there from the Western perspective, but studying the Akan way of practicing PRs, there are certain things we do that are not captured in this model. So by way of revising them to fit our contextual disparity, is that possible?
Yes, that's highly possible. Like, so I said, Akans have a lot to offer. Their culture, very rich culture in Africa in general, except that, like we said, you may need a full detail or deep accounts into Akan culture to be able to come up. Like Madam mentioned, expert prescription. We could find that, except that we haven't probably commissioned a study to look at that. If we were to look at that, probably we can find evidences where Akans can have expert prescription and what do you call it, problem-solving facility.
In fact, I wanted to talk about that. In Akan culture, the linguists do that. You see, as you even beautifully illustrated over here, because the linguist is like boundary spanning between the people and then the elders or the chiefs, and then also even the communication technicians and the media relations practitioners, they are all forming some sort of boundary spanning role. So normally what the linguist does when the chief and divisional chiefs they meet is they also give feedback as to this is what the people are saying. So this is when they are communicators. So they also guide us in this is what this is what I think we should be doing. So when it comes to advice or counseling, the linguist is very important when the chiefs and divisional chiefs meet. Doc has already
or even the kingmakers.
Yes, the kingmakers.
There are also kingmakers that are they control what the chief says in public.
Yes.
And that is based on the feedback, the sort of image they want to
image. He had already touched on that, so I didn't even want to extend it to that. But it is true that even when it comes to what they are going to say in public, I think he linked that to the Maria here. I was going to say that Doc even took the bullet out of my hand when she also talked about linking it to us and what we do that they probably do not do. Because that will even make it us also developing something that. But of course, I remember in the beginning, your focus was on showing that research, proving the 2016 research, that they were faulty when they said public relations was not practiced in our parts of the world. So I get it from that angle that your focus was on trying to disprove, but maybe in future we can look at, as you said, deeper and then see some of the things we're doing.
We do that. They don't have it.
Because evidence even shows that our chieftaincy system was practicing democracy before democracy as we know it was introduced into our part of the world. So I believe that there are certain things that we can teach them when it comes to democracy or even when it comes to excellent communication. So even though they say it is excellent, it doesn't necessarily make it excellent because as the Slav study and other studies have shown, it is dependent on where it is coming from, where it is placed, and where it is practiced. So, fantastic one. Thank you.
Good job. This is a very solid.
Yes.
I was going to pin you on the diversity, but I defended that. So. So.
Are there any further
Yes.
questions?
Yes. All right.